G'day folks, ZiggyD here. Over the last several days, myself and my community have sent a literal boatload of shipments to each port, testing every different combination of resources and dust and the various different mechanics and theories, and untesting things and retesting things, and trying to build a complete picture of the mechanics of Settlers of Kalguur's shipping. It's pretty approachable on the surface, kind of cozy and fun, but pretty nuanced under the hood, and I'm very happy to say that we have indeed managed to build up a pretty complete picture of at least the mechanics so that we can start to put together some strategies together. So first, here's the reward types. Not only do specific resources correlate to specific reward types, but where you send them also matters as well. We managed to confirm things like, for example, if you send Crimson Iron or Orichalcum, which give armor and weapons, to Nakanu, for example, they'll result in strength. Ribbonfell is mixed, Pondium's intelligence, and then things like Kalguur being a more distant port seems to factor into the quality of them that you get back, but more on scaling later. You can see some pretty fun and interesting stuff here, like for example Verisium giving a mixture of stuff here at Pondium, as well as all sorts of splinters from Kalguur. You can even farm Scours by sending Verisium to Ribbonfell. And through a lot of testing of each different food and different combinations of foods, as far as we can tell, all food just gives mixed currency. The quality of that currency and amounts can certainly scale up. Outside of favored resource requests, if you send a certain amount of trade value of pumpkin to one port, and then send the same amount of trade value in wheat to that same port, you will get a similar level of currency, and it is surprisingly consistent. And finally, Thaumaturgic Dust counts as a shipment value multiplier. As you can see here, just a small amount will double the value of your shipment, and it does scale up, but it does have pretty heavy diminishing returns. That said, I do think there'll be some strategies that do send large amounts of dust, but more on that later. If you just want to know what resources where give you which rewards, then you'll probably just need the cheat sheet, and that'll be linked in the description below. One final thing on specific rewards though, and that is runes and tattoos. Shipments to Kalguuran ports, that's the black flags, will give runes, and shipments to Karui ports, that's the green flags, will give tattoos. Runes pretty consistently come back with almost any size of shipment, but certainly the total size of the shipment, the total value of the shipment, as it goes up, you'll get more runes and seemingly higher runes as well. And because tattoos are individually kind of considered a bit more valuable than individual runes, it's a bit harder to get a tattoo in the first place. Small shipments will often not get any tattoos. Like for example, less than 100,000 total value will often not get a tattoo. It is possible, but pretty rare. But once you start getting over 100,000 value and pushing up, you'll more consistently get one or more tattoos, and certainly some of those big shipments have gotten multiple. Tattoos and runes are not tied to any specific resources as far as we can tell, unless there's some subtle biasing of tattoo or rune type or anything like that. As far as we can tell, it just kind of scales up through a tiering system. And then of course, randomness and variance. Alright, so that's the basics on what type of rewards you get. Let's talk about now the nuances of how you scale them up. And to do that, we first have to talk about favored resources, the request and fulfillment system. So that is when you mouse over one of the ports and they say they want a certain resource and they're giving you a bonus for what X volume of it. So Nakanu here wants Crimson Iron and Wheat, and for up to that amount of it, they will give you the listed bonus. So 20% for Crimson Iron, which is quite low, 50% for Wheat, which is medium, and then sometimes you can see like 90% and more. Do keep in mind though, that port upgrades play a big impact here, as the final port upgrade gives 50% more rewarding port quotas. So you might get like 135% bonus instead of 90%. That's pretty big for the scaling we'll talk about later. But first, let's just talk about the mechanics of the port favored resource system, because I think our community has so far produced some of the more tested knowledge on how this system works. So as you complete a list of fulfillments, that is fulfilling all of the things on that list, you will get back a bonus reward. That is a random unique. So if you're wondering why you got some random unique belt with your currency shipment when you completed a fulfillment, that is why. You can also get uniques just as a part of your other rewards. So for example, if you send a shipment of Orichalcum to Kalguur, granting weapons, and it's a pretty decent value shipment, then there's a good chance that you might get a unique or even multiple. So sometimes you'll do a fulfillment and you'll get some unique, sometimes you'll do a fulfillment, you'll get a unique from that, and you'll also get a unique or more from your other shipment as well. So bonus uniques are nice, but the important part of this system is actually that multiplier. the ability to get 90% increased value for all of the petrified amber you send up to 29,000, for example. That's going to result in a lot more high quality rings, a lot more rings in general, and a lot more unique rings. You know, or conversely, 70% bonus on ore gourds, that's a food, to Kalguur is going to give a nice bonus to the currency you get back from that. That multiplier is a huge thing, right? Because consider this. You send a large volume of, let's say, wheat to Pondium here, and then you add some thaumaturgic dust to multiply that by 3 times or more. And then you send that shipment of wheat multiplied by the dust to Pondium and scale all of that total value by 90% again. That's almost doubling it. That's a substantial bonus to what you'll end up getting back, and pretty key to getting those juicy rewards. Sure, you can get lucky just by sending some random mixed foods to whatever port you want, and that might occasionally result in someone posting a mirror screenshot to Reddit or something. But the more consistent returns is going to come from leveraging those multipliers, as always in Path of Exile, right? That's the concept of juicing, is like stacking these scaling modifiers together. It's good to have a lot of quantity on your map, but what multiplies that? The amount of monsters in that map. It's the same sort of concept here. Large shipments multiplied by dust, multiplied by the favored resource. There's some other nuances we'll talk about a little bit later, but let's still just dissect the rest of the details of this favored shipment process, because you obviously want large favored resource requests at ports so that you can send more of that resource there for that multiplier when it high rolls, like this wheat, for example. So it's great that this wheat has 90%. That's basically as high as it rolls before you get port upgrades, but it's only for 5,000 wheat. That's an okay amount, but what if it was like 40,000, right? So how do you make those numbers go up? Some people have correctly surmised that there is some sort of leveling port system going on. We've done a bunch of testing on this and figured out what it isn't, at least. As you complete fulfillments, the next fulfillment request will be larger. We did a bunch of different tests on this, but you can see just one little test I did here. I converted the resources to trade value, as that is a consistent way to kind of like measure different types of resources against each other, because like wheat is worth less than ore gourds and so on. So by calculating those as trade value, we're able to get a picture of kind of like how those requests were going up. The first request was 11,000 total trade value, and then the next request was 15,000, and then the next request was 20,000, and then it kept going up, right? And multiple tests confirm this kind of process. What's interesting though is this seems to be a global system. So doing fulfillments anywhere seems to push up a global hidden port level, basically the wealth of the region, consider it. The way that we kind of found this out is that we had someone who had done a ton of fulfillments at one port, but none at the other. So they had something like this, 26,000 requested at Nakanu, for example, and then their Ripenfell, which they'd never shipped to, had like 28 request for a resource, so a tiny total request, and then they did one fulfillment to Ripenfell and it instantly jumped to the global level, rather than say going up a little bit at a time as if it had independent levels. It immediately jumped to that larger amount that the other port had. And indeed the other ports would do the same, and that's because it seems like that's not the case at first glance, and that's because they don't refresh until you complete a fulfillment. So if you're sitting here with a bunch of Crimson Iron requests and you don't really care about doing that, you have to fulfill them in order to see what the next thing is, right? So if you really want to do something specific to Onui, then you're going to have to keep completing its fulfillments until one of the requests rolls the thing that you want. So there's going to be some element here of going around and doing different requests and trying to both push that level up so that you can get bigger total ones, but then also roll a good one that you are excited about doing. So getting a resource that's giving you the reward you want, often like food for currency or something, but maybe, you know, something like Verisium for catalysts or scarabs or whatever, and then getting that at the port that you need for that specific reward, and then hitting a high roll on the multiplier there, so that you can then kind of cash in a big shipment. So that's what I've been doing. I've been really focusing on fulfilling rewards, and I think this will be the early game strategy, more on that later. And as you can see, that can still be quite lucrative. This was just focused on doing a fulfillment, so we have a unique. But, you know, I also still get a nice little trickle of currency back and some runes. The war runes, by the way, are worth like 10C or something, so not bad. And as you can see, I was working on an amber request here that I haven't actually completed. So I didn't get a bonus fulfillment request unique there, but I did get a random unique just as part of the fact that this is rings, right? And that's because it was a pretty decent amount of amber with a decent amount of dust, and it had a nice fulfillment bonus. So not only did I get like seemingly pretty well rolled rings, right? It definitely has an impact on quality. but also quite a good chunk of runes here, more so than I'd get for sending a small shipment. So as you can see, we're really starting to get a solid understanding of how this all works so that we can start developing those strategies. Now, we did test just a couple other nuances about the port kind of fulfillment leveling system. We tested whether that was character level bound, because that is often the case for League mechanics. And to test this, we had like a high level character who had pushed up their fulfillments a bunch, swap over to a low level character, like a level 5 character, and do a shipment. And the port didn't go down, at least, so we can at least say that there's not going to be like some sort of de-leveling, or that it doesn't like reset to the level of your current character, at least. I think it's highly likely that it is a global port leveling system, just that's the simplest answer in the end. There is a remote possibility that there are other explanations, like it's character level assigned, but then there's some sort of like safety check against de-leveling, but that would be overcomplicating things. Anyway, stop by my stream, and if you want to discuss some of the testing data and alternative theories and stuff like that, let me know in the comments, or stop by the stream and we can work on that, because that is what we've been doing and having a lot of fun with. Now here's just some additional extra thoughts on scaling and kind of getting the most out of your shipments before we go for a bit of a summary and some strategies. And that is, again, don't forget the port upgrades. Not only do you get increased port quotas and faster shipping speed, but 3 ships with 6 crew each is a pretty big milestone, as, well, obviously you're sending more ships, so you're getting more stuff back over time. But the 6 crew allows you to push the value of those shipments much higher. As you level up those port requests, you're going to start stacking that with multipliers, and you're going to want to try and potentially push that risk up higher. So the extra crew allows you to do that. That said, you don't necessarily always need to run max crew. I often found that I was pushing, just for fulfillments, 0 risk shipments, which meant that I probably had crew that I didn't really need, and that was burning gold that I didn't need to. You have to pay those wages, right? So if you're just doing low tier fulfillment requests and you're not really doing a lot of risk, consider removing some crew. Have them sit idle so you don't have to pay their wages. And another thing to talk about for rewards is that people are doing things like sending large shipments and not seeing more total currency coming back. And that is because there is not only kind of a scaling amount that you get back, but there is also a quality roll-up system. One of the developers actually mentioned this to me when I was in New Zealand. They said that when they kind of like were showcasing the multiple pages of loot, they realized that, okay, sending them like 600 alterations may not be the best strategy. So we're going to add some sort of like quality roll-up system where at a certain point, your shipment value goes up and those alterations start converting into higher tier currencies, like you get chaos instead, right? So you might not necessarily get more stuff, sometimes you'll just get better stuff. So instead of more rings, you might just get better rolled rings. Or, you know, it's probably a function of both. You're getting a bit more, but also better rolled, and at some point maybe it's going to kind of like, you're going to be getting a bit less, but you get better rolled, and there's likely some variance on both axes. Another thing is it's becoming pretty clear that port distance plays a role, and that just makes sense. Why would you get the same rewards for a 40-minute shipment to Nakano as you get for a 4-hour shipment to Kalguur? It seems that inherently the more distant ports give larger rewards, to the point that like armor and weapons from Kalguur, for example, feel quote-unquote well rolled. So the ideal alignment of events will be your perfect resource request to Kalguur or one of the distant ports with a high multiplier that you then send a giant juiced up ship to. Now, one other thing that's still kind of being tested and worked on and trying to be understood, but I did want to bring it up, at least kind of some theories on that, is this idea of the shipment value and what it actually means. So as you send more and more stuff, the shipment value goes up, and so too at a certain point, depending on the level of your shipping people, does your risk. And the risk is of you losing like a big chunk of that shipment back, right? Like you might lose 75% of the value, or 50 or 25%. There's a few different events like that. Do keep in mind they updated the text here to reflect the fact that sometimes you can lose crew members, or ships can be commandeered by the bosses, even if you're at 0 risk. So there's never no risk to shipping, but actually losing your return is what happens with the risk bar. Now this shipment value, it's being kind of argued over whether it actually does a thing in terms of your rewards, or whether it's just a reflection of your kind of total risk. I think it is just a mathematical conversion of the value of each of these things as they are represented in terms of risk. So I think ZiggyD just wanted a way to say that, you know, a certain amount of Crimson Iron Bar represents a certain amount of value because you just get, you know, armor back for them, versus something like a high-end currency generating resource, or indeed Verisium, which gives a ton of stuff, which generates a lot more value here, to make that more risky in smaller quantities. That all is to say that and this is something we've tested a bunch, is that, for example, let's say you're trying to get fragments with Verisium. Sending a crapload of wheat with that to upgrade your shipment value doesn't seem to impact the reward you get back for one particular resource. The amount of fragments you get back for your Verisium is based on the amount of Verisium you send, not the other things that are with that shipment. Because think about this, right? You can send a shipment of just Verisium and get, you know, with a bunch of dust to scale, and then obviously like the port multipliers and all that jazz. And you'll get a certain amount of fragments back. If I took that same ship and then just added a ton of random food to it, and the risk goes up, the total shipment value goes up, but the fragments I get from the Verisium won't go up, at least as far as we can tell. It is possible that there is some effect that this has on your overall returns, but not in a way that we've been able to put down into tables yet. Now that said, that doesn't mean that sending mixed shipments is a bad idea. Don't take that wrong, because, for example, consider if you're putting a bunch of dust into a shipment, really multiplying that Verisium, well then, you can also take advantage of that investment with your other resources, right? That same thaumaturgic dust is not only multiplying my Verisium, but also all of these other things that I'm sending, so it's getting a lot more value there. And because that takes a fair bit of wages of gold to produce, that is worth considering. I personally think I'll probably mostly be sending the favored resources to each port and not adding too much other random stuff unless I'm just kind of jacking up a shipment for overnight while I sleep. But we'll see how the strategies develop down the line. So you should now at least have the mechanical understanding of the system to start developing your own strategies, right? I'm sure you've listened to some things that we've said here and already started to make some connections and come up with some theories of your own. But I did also just want to present you with some strategy theories of my own here. And again, these are just theories. Certainly take a look at the mechanics and figure out what you think will work for you. Early on though, I think things are somewhat solved. Your focus should be on leveling up your ports and upgrading your town, so that you can then get those big shipment rank bonuses, right? Like those are pretty significant. So just run pretty low wage cost ships, just good enough to not have too much risk, and focus on fulfilling those port requests while you save gold to level your town. Go around to each port and send them the things that they require so you can start leveling up that global kind of favored resource system, so that down the line you can start cashing in on that once you reach a desired level of upgrades on your shipping port. And then I think the strategies are going to go in kind of two broad directions. The first one is going to be big shipments that focus on multiplying resource quantity with thaumaturgic dust and the big favored resource bonuses and an extra bonus if it's to a distant port. And you'll want to match that with sending the right resources to the right ports for the rewards that you want. This is that like mega juicer approach, right? And what will likely give you those screenshots of like really juicy pages of currency and other rewards. It'll require high level shipping people and a maxed upgrade port, and also it'll require some kind of fishing for good favored resource requests at the right ports. You won't really want to dump a ton of resources and thaumaturgic dust and gold into a shipment to a port that's not really giving you the rewards that you want. Likely you'll be focusing a lot on currency, but also it'll be really nice when you can multiply it with something like getting scarabs or fragments or something else nice back. And then the other approach is kind of the smaller, low-risk, low-wage ship spam approach. This will be good for people who can only play like a few hours here and there. This is good for the, you know, I'm a father of 12 and I can only play 2 hours a week players. But also, jokes aside, probably a good strategy for a lot of us. So this relies on the idea that perhaps there is a bit of a diminishing returns to sending large quantities of resource, just the same as there is for the dust multiplier. So the concept is that you take smaller shipments, just focusing on kind of fulfilling low-risk favored resource requests. So for example, taking some corn here to Kalguur, for example. So I would probably run potentially lower wage people than this. Let's see kind of what we can get away with here. Maybe kind of using the dust multiplier to bring the risk up to an acceptable level. It looks like probably we'd want to run a little bit more crew than that, but not really going for the fishing for the really, really high level crew. Just to get that gold per hour a bit lower, because I can't play that much, right? And then just sending these sorts of ships repeatedly, right? And just getting those nice little kind of pulls of the slot lever of the where you you get some random bubblegum currency and occasionally get lucky and high roll a divine. And it acts as a nice little passive income in addition, while you're offline or while you're doing your other mapping. Best thing, of course, is that it's just way leaner of gold, so you can focus, again, more on town upgrades, or you can, you know, potentially play a lot less and still be able to do kind of multiple shipments even when you're not able to actively play. You're still able to take advantage of those favored resource bonuses, but you're never really going to get those exciting pages of loot, probably. Alright folks, there you have it. There's some mechanics on the Settlers of Kalguur shipping, gleaned from a large group of people having a lot of fun. Maybe a bit too much fun testing these mechanics. I've not been so engaged in a specific aspect of a League mechanic in a while. It's very fun. There's obviously still more to learn, and definitely the strategy element of things is something that we're going to have to develop just through testing and feeling it out, as well as, you know, people doing large amounts of data of like doing large shipments versus small shipments and seeing kind of what works out better overall. Of course, there's always an aspect to tailoring strategies to your own kind of personal playstyle. Like I said, those, you know, running lower gold strategies for people who can't play as much. But I hope you found this insightful. If you've come up with any other interesting conclusions or have an idea of something we could test, please let me know in the comments below or drop by the stream where we're working on this actively. That's it for now. I'm ZiggyD, and thanks for watching.